first person who's going to be reading for us today is someone I heard read the first time at St. Mary's Festival of Writers in St. Mary's City, Maryland, at St. Mary's College, and I thought she was so incredible. I was sitting near Lucille Clifton, and we're sitting there going, God, she's so good. You know, so we kept coming back to it and saying how good she was, how wonderful, and she really moved me to tears. Now I'm going to mispronounce your name, guaranteed. Can I call you Twee? I will, and then you can pronounce your name when you come up here. Thuy was born in Vietnam during the war and raised in Southern California. She's the recipient of a 1996 New Works for a New World Commission grant and a 1997 Bridge residency in the Headland Center for the Arts. She's performed her poetry in conjunction with An Ocean Apart, the Smithsonian Museum's traveling exhibit of contemporary Vietnamese art from the US and Vietnam. Her writing has appeared in the Massachusetts Review and Harper's Magazine, as well as in several anthologies, including The Very Inside, an anthology of writings by Asian and Pacific Islander, lesbian, and bisexual women. She's currently working on a novel called The Bodies Between Us. What an incredible title, and I think you're in for a big treat. Let's welcome, Thuy.
This is a piece called California Palms, and I'm just going to read from the beginning of it. Before my mother arrived in the US, I perceived myself to be an American, whatever that is. I'd acquired a taste for dill pickles, macaroni and cheese, was an expert at the hula hoop and roller skating backwards. My mother reacquainted me with condensed milk, ginger fried fish, lychee nuts, and an entire history I thought I'd thrown overboard and left for sunken treasure, or so much useless luggage adrift in the watery vaults of the Pacific. My mother's presence complicated everything. She seemed to be dragging memories right out of the sea, shaking them loose on the shore before holding them up to the light and handing them back to me. When my mother arrived in the States in 1980, she had lost 2 children, survived 2 wars, was separated from her mother and father, brothers and sisters, and the land of her birth by an entire ocean. My father and I had escaped Vietnam in 1978. During the 2 years between our departure from Vietnam and my mother's arrival in the US with my younger sister in 1980, my father and I had sent my mother's portraits of ourselves decked out in our best clothes, standing in front of big cars and fancy houses in the wealthy neighborhood of La Jolla, a virtual independent republic of San Diego, California. Through so many smiling images, we led her to believe that the hacienda-style house stretching out behind the 2 giant California palms was indeed our home in America. She arrived to find we had no house. What's more, I claimed she wasn't my real mother. I held on to this belief for years, for months, even coupling it with the suspicion that this man and woman who assumed the roles of my father and mother were in reality communist spies, and that the young girl of 2 or 3 who was supposedly my sister wasn't really my sister, but some child who was cast to be the younger sister, just as I had been cast to be the older sister, in what appeared to be the portrait of a struggling Vietnamese family newly arrived in America. Where this elaborate drama came from, I do not know, except to say that in my worldly travels as an 8-year-old, in what were still the Cold War years, I had picked up the common wisdom that the opposite of an American was a communist. Also, I had a vivid imagination. I was convinced that entire rooms changed once I'd stepped out of them, like a turning stage which twirled one living room away and brought another living room forward, with the same actors in place, but in changed costumes and changed characters, which meant that an entirely different drama was about to unfold. The next piece is a poem that I wrote about my mother, and I wrote it sort of in honor of my mother, thinking about how when she got here, nothing was the way that she had anticipated. And instead of stopping and having a nervous breakdown, she sort of just pulled everybody together. And she used to do this thing which was her sort of one sign of intense agitation. And in Vietnamese it's "Trời đất ơi thế hả?" And it's basically "oh my God," right, in English. But in Vietnamese it means heaven and earth and everything in between. Oh really, right? And growing up in sort of a bilingual situation, I always thought it was better to say "oh my God" in Vietnamese instead of in English because it was so much more satisfying. But this poem is called Shelling Shrimp, and it's to my mother. Heaven and earth and everything in between, oh, she says, shelling shrimp. She says this, removing the thinnest purple of their veins. Later, rinsing her hands under the faucet, my mother calls everyone to the table. Eat, she says, pushing her hair back with a wet hand. Eat, and we do. This piece is to my dad, and the book that I'm working on, The Gangster We're All Looking For, is sort of about the idea, about the myth, the liveliness of this myth of the gangster in my family. And my dad is the first gangster in line. In praise of my ba, #1 Vietnamese Buddhist gangster. When I walk into a room, I am wanting to hold my head like you do. Pull everything into that cool perception. Wrap my mind around the twitching details of a window painted shut, a woman's crooked hemline, a drink left sweating on the table, anticipating hands and lips thirsting for my touch. Then, shocking everyone, break into a high, sad tune and sing about the sea, for no apparent reason than that I'm drunk and love it. One of the things that my mother did when she came to the States was she corrected my name, or she corrected two pieces of information that my father and I had believed was true. And the first was that my name wasn't Thuy, it was actually Trang. And the reason why I thought my name was Thuy was that when I was in Vietnam, I had an older sister who was called Big Girl, and I was called Little Girl. And we were never called by our formal names. Her formal name was Thuy, and mine was Trang. And when my father and I escaped in '78, he wrote down that my formal name was Thuy and that my birthday was January 15th. And he said he got it wrong because he didn't pick my name. So my mother came over in 1980 and she said, actually, your birthday's on January 12th and your name is Trang. And I thought for a minute I would get to have 2 birthdays in 1 week, and she said no. And I thought that I would get to have my name back, Trang, because I didn't like Twee. You know, people said Tweety Bird and 1, 2, Twee and Twee. And so I thought, oh, I'll be Trang now. And she said no, because in 1980, my older sister had drowned at a refugee camp in Malaysia. And so my mother said, Twee was a part of her that got out of the country, and so she said I had to keep my sister's name. And I wasn't so psyched about it, you know, but I felt that what she did was, by making me keep this name, my mother sort of insisted that I understand how crowded my name is, or how crowded memories are, and that within my name my mother had sort of, you know, held on to the memory of my sister. And so I wrote this poem about a dress that my mother brought over, which belonged to my sister. And I was a big tomboy growing up, and I didn't like dresses, but one year I got into my head that I should have this dress because I had her name, and why shouldn't I have her dress? but my mother said no. So I wrote this poem. Big girl, little girl. Wearing her dress like I wear her name. Don't you know, sweat makes it mine. It means I'm here and living. When it was yours, you drenched it in ocean water, soaked it wet with your death. Ma had to keep it in the silky compartment of her suitcase, folded small and tight like a secret, and like a secret, it never dried. If I hadn't dragged this dress out of the attic, it would have spilled out. And me, the biggest girl now that you're gone, I would have had to swish you round the floor until everything you spilled was soaked dry by this dress. Isn't it better I dry it on my body? Each drop of sweat pushing back the waves, so that when I'm the age you left, dying, I will have pushed the entire ocean out and gone leaping across it, both legs kicking in the air, the way we used to leap over jump ropes, running to meet on the other side. It didn't even touch me, we'd say. This is a companion poem to the last one. It's untitled. Nothing but the negative of my sister buried in swaths of pink cloth, in a coffin tilted upright for a photograph to which I have only held this negative. So her face is strangely electric, shining bright as a coquettish moon, in the center of that hair which, brooding blue-black, is hard to separate from the dark of the coffin. Like I say, her face is electric, and her body is a bundle of pink cloth. I don't see hands or feet. I am the type who looks for the twist of fingernails and the curve of toes, attuned to peculiarities. But there's nothing more peculiar than the way she remains floating, as though death itself just happened to get in the way of some place she was heading for. This negative itself a poor record of a place she's already been to, gone. What stays are my fingerprints washing over film. One of the things that I'm very interested in is the idea of proof and having or not having things to prove experiences, not having photographs or not having mementos of where you came from. And when I was young, I had an older brother who was 2 years older than me, and he was my hero. I idolized him. And he drowned 2 years before I came to the States. And my mother had said to me that he fell into a hole in the sea. And so I didn't really actually believe that he had died. I thought that he was sitting in a room underwater waiting for me. And I was convinced that he hadn't died for years. And I felt that I had no proof that he had died, so I didn't believe that he had. And then I think about 5-6 years ago, I wrote this poem to my brother, and so I'll just read it. It's untitled. Ma said one day Lady Six hung her clothes out, and the wind blew her away, but her clothes dried. Tuong, I rarely write your name, almost never speak it, and when I dream you closer to me, I call you brother. In the afternoon, my brother Tuong drowned, dragged down, turned round into water, buried there, Your body surfaced in the evening, enlarged, big with your absence. Every day your body stretched, bigger and bigger, eyebrows arching along the horizon, bare feet plunged deep into the sea. Elemental, you became 2 long arms, fingers open, hands outstretched, catching nothing, impossible to catch. The explosion I waited for, my brother falling back to me, a wounded bird from the sky, never came. You slipped away slowly, without ceremony. Insistent, I searched corners, scanned the water's surface. I began to miss, without words, a floating dash in the ocean. All the time, everywhere, seeking you. There must be a trace of blood left somewhere on me. Your blood from nosebleeds fights along the beach, scratches from the splintered floor of fishing boats we ran and hid in. Somewhere there must be a trace of you in me, packed tight like gunpowder in this traveling shell of me. Ma knew. Sitting on the train ride home, a woman known to be mad said, "Keep your children away from water," then dropped an egg. Blood cracked across the dirty floor and cut a line at Ma's feet, a red gash which she stepped over and walked home to you, laid out big in Grandpa's small house, the air thick in every room without you. The mosquitoes busied themselves with talk. I laughed at your body lying so still between the 2 beds. I laughed myself to sleep behind the mosquito net, daring you not to twitch at this slow bloodletting. Ma says it's bad luck to keep pictures of a dead person. She cuts out the dead person's head, their face, hair. Sometimes even their neck disappears in one flick of her wrist. All that's left are open spaces, living people standing in space with a dead person's arm still holding them, still wrapped around them, but no face to go with the touch. I look through the shape she's cut and see my own toes curled, gripping the floor, holding on to this world, my head pressed against the suggestion of yours. When I return to Vietnam, I will bury you. If unable, I will float for ages, speaking your name, Tung, softly like butterfly dust, Tung, like a bullet, Tung, like a boy running, laughing in a film with no sound, Tung, like Lady Six's empty clothes whispering on the line, Tung. Ma says it's time to go home, Tung, Tung, Tung. There has been a lot of tragedy, and but then also some very incredible moments. I mean, very happy moments, or just very joyous moments. And I think I'm inspired by the different emotions that are present in every moment. Like that, you know, when my parents and I came here to the U.S. from Vietnam, it was under very difficult circumstances. We were escaping Vietnam. But then when we came here and we learned English and, you know, all the things that immigrants do, which is so funny. Like, we went and we thought dog food was like human food, or we weren't quite sure like where the post office was, and we get lost in our own neighborhood, which in a way you think, oh God, that's so sad. But in another way, I think when looking back on it, it's so comic, you know, because it's like the world is new again, or the world has the possibilities of being discovered again. So I think even in very sad moments or in very sad situations, it's not just sadness, it's sort of like another truth. Like, no, life isn't just sad, or it isn't just happy, or it isn't just odd. It's sort of a combination of all of those feelings, all those emotions. And when I'm writing something, I try to pull in on all of that. So I think there has been a lot of sadness in my life, but it doesn't necessarily make me sad. It just makes me feel that life is very full and there are a lot of aspects to every moment. So I try to focus on that. I left Vietnam in 1978 with my father, and then my mother and my sister came 2 years later. And when I was growing up in the US, there was a strong contradiction between the memory of Vietnam as I learned it in school, which was primarily focused on the war, and the way that my parents talked about Vietnam, which was primarily focused on memories of other members of our family, like my grandparents or my other siblings. And it wasn't until very recently that my parents ever talked about the war. And in a way, I felt like at home, there wasn't a war, but whenever I went out to school or out to the movies, it seemed that all Vietnam was the war. And that contradiction between Vietnam as a war and Vietnam as this place where I grew up or where members of my family still live sort of pushed me to, explore, well, what is Vietnam, or what do I remember of Vietnam, or how has my mother kept Vietnam alive for me through the stories that she tells, or just through the way that she speaks English, which is very inflected with Vietnamese. She speaks English like she's speaking Vietnamese in a way, like she drags out the letters. She sort of lingers with her language. I mean, Vietnamese is a very tonal language, and when my mother was learning English, she wouldn't say, but the door is over there. She would say, but the door is over there. And my sister and I would always say, it's just but. You just stop it at but. And she wouldn't. She'd sort of drag it out. And I sort of, when I was young, I didn't really appreciate that, but now I think I really do, because it's the way in which she insinuates a Vietnamese inflection into everything that she does, because she's Vietnamese. I mean, she's Vietnamese in the States, and she's picked things up and let things go, but she's also held on to a lot of things from Vietnam, and she passed those things on to me. I didn't know a word of English when I came to the States. I learned English through English as a second language classes, and I remember reading those, See Spot Run books. And I was actually very terrified of English when I was learning it, because I was convinced that if I didn't speak English well, then my father and I would be evicted from the country. So I thought that our ability to stay was dependent on my ability to pronounce and translate things. So at first I felt, my relationship to English was very sort of dangerous. I felt very afraid that I was saying things wrong, and I was so focused on getting the words right and pronouncing things right that I think I wasn't expressing myself. I was answering questions, I was asking questions, but I sort of wasn't telling anybody anything, or I was keeping a lot of myself quiet. And so the older I got, the more I wanted to be able to express myself in English, to be able to say things in English that were revealing, and not just sort of answering the question that was being asked, but also posing a question, or, moving the conversation along in a way where I felt that I wasn't just like doing what was needed, but actually contributing or adding on. So I think my relationship to English is, it's very complicated, because I write in English. It's not my first language, but it's my writing language, and it's the language that I'm most comfortable with and most versatile in. There are a lot of ways that I try to insinuate Vietnamese into English, or I want the tonality of Vietnamese in my English writing, but primarily I work in English. I think that I live in a variety of cultures, like that I was born in Vietnam. I grew up there for the first 6 years of my life, and then I came to the States. And I grew up in the States, and I picked up a lot of things in American culture, and I learned, I was educated in the States. I learned English, I watched television, and I'm interested in the idea of what an American is, given that we all came from somewhere else. I'm sort of interested in how we got here, why we came here, and what we did here, what we became in the States. So I feel like partly I'm from Vietnamese culture and from American culture, but I'm not only from those two cultures. I'm from the culture of whatever communities that I live in, or who my friends are, the places that I live, the places that I go to. I pick things up all the time. I feel like, for me, it's not, I don't try to think of whether I've lost my culture or not. I try to think about who I am to myself and whether I can be truthful in a given situation, if I'm being frank, or, if I try not to hide things about myself, or I try not to lie, or I try not to be in situations where I feel that it's false. And so I'm not sure whether, that's culturally specific to anybody or any place. I don't think it is. I just try to be myself, I guess, in a complicated way, because I think everybody comes from a lot of different cultures. Everybody is, there's your ethnicity, but then there's the place you grew up, there's your friends, there's what you picked up from traveling, or there's what you just picked up, from jobs that you worked at. That's a culture. So I try to live my life approaching the idea of culture as this thing that's very mixed and complicated and is constantly moving. So in that sense, it's not something that can ever be taken away from me. It's something that, it's a place that I think of myself as standing centered in, and that really can't be pulled out from under me or anything like that. Well, my parents wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, but I think poetry because I love words. I love the sound of words. I love what they say and what they don't say. I like the way that words move, and they're imperfect, you write a sentence or you create a verse and it's not what you want, and you go back and you edit it, you're listening for the sound of it, and the meaning of it, and it's so many things. So for me, I feel like it's the place that I express myself. It's a way that I express myself, and I feel like of all the things I've ever done, it's the only work where I feel that I'm being worked, that I'm, that all of me is in it, and that I'm contributing something. I feel that very strongly, that I'm most useful through my work in writing. And I could do other things, but I'm most myself and have the most to contribute because of my work.